All right, well, good morning, everybody. How we doing? Having fun? Excellent. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Nate Schutta. I guess I'm a technical director is my title at Thoughtworks, which is just a fancy way of saying I'm an architect as a service. I will say the first time someone called me that, I thought, yeah, that's pretty fitting. That's kind of what I do. I go places, talk to people about architecture and cloud and things like that. I will admit, the first time someone said that to me, I did sound the acronym out in my head and realized it may not have been a compliment, but I try to take it in the most positive way humanly possible. So I think most of you are familiar with the fact that patterns are very common in our space. You know, there's a pretty good chance that we're solving a problem that other people have already solved, and maybe they've done it better, maybe they've done it worse. I have noticed in many cases that we really do like to reinvent the wheel. But if you've been in our space long enough, you start to see these patterns emerge. And of course, experienced designers, they reuse things that we've done in the past, or maybe we just steal. I guess sometimes that's the right approach. But a lot of this goes back to Christopher Alexander. And you may or may not be familiar with him, but he's an actual architect. You know, not like me. I always put software in front of architect when I tell people what I do, because he's like, no, I can't tell you anything about your house or how the building codes work in your neighborhood or anything like that. Yeah, but he is the original influencer of architecture. And amazingly enough, he has impacted our world in ways large and small. You know, he's actually influenced language design, OO programming, agile software development, wiki, et cetera. And many people would call him the father of patterns languages. You know, and if you dig into the original Gang of Four book, you start to see his influence, you know, come out there. You know, I'm old enough to have completely forgotten the actual title of this book, and it's a reminder to me that we take for granted that people know what we know. I was having a conversation a few years ago with a relatively new developer, and I mentioned, oh, that's just a standard Gang of Four pattern. And he looked at me and he's like, what do you mean? I said, well, you know, Goff, Gang of Four, like you've read that book. And he's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, the Gang of Four book. And I had to Google it to find the title, and I'm like, this. And he's like, oh, I've never heard of that. I'm like, oh, okay, all right. What you realize in our space is the answer to every question is, of course, it depends. And every decision we make is a trade-off. And if you've ever been on a software project, you understand that we make a lot of decisions. Now, some of them are really inconsequential, at least in the moment. And then we discover a few years later that actually that was a really consequential decision, and maybe we got it right, maybe we got it wrong. And this is where patterns help us, because they give us this idea of, hey, here's a problem that you're likely to encounter, and here's a solution that we've found that works. You can use it again and again and again, rinse, repeat. That's a good thing. Now, these actually end up everywhere. I mean, think about where you live. There are patterns in your home. Doors are a perfect example of this. There are two doors, well, actually, there's four doors in here. I'm not sure what those two do. That's interesting. But, you know, doors are very common. They have different implementation details. The moral of the story is you need to get into and out of a room, and maybe they're more ornate, maybe they're more plain, but they all kind of do the same thing. They get you there in different ways. If you've ever been watching a movie or a TV show or reading a book and you're like, wait, this sounds really familiar to me. I think I've seen that story before. You know, is this just a glitch in the matrix? Is that what's going on here? You know, is that the problem? There's really only maybe 7 or 9 plots. You know, there's the quest and there's the rags to riches and overcoming the monster. And we have the same thing. I didn't fully appreciate that beginning of my career. You know, I remember being in college, I had this conversation with my advisor. He'd come from industry, gotten his PhD, went back to teach. And I was just like, why'd you do that? You know, what caused you to go back and want to be a teacher? And he said, well, Nate, I got tired of building the same app over and over and over again. And I'm like, huh, that's interesting. He says, yeah, I've basically spent my entire career putting front ends onto databases. And I thought, well, that won't be my career. And then I got into the real world and realized, no, that's basically what I've done my entire career. Now, maybe different implementation details and different data stores and different front-end technologies, but the same basic thing. And to be blunt, that's my whole career. And I was talking to a friend of mine, Deshaun Carter, about this, and I mentioned some comment about, you know, in 10 or 20 years, and he said, oh, Nate, in 20 years, I'll be doing the exact same thing I'm doing today. And I said, well, what's that? He said, app modernization. And I went, oh man, you're right. That's, again, been my entire career. Let's take the green screen, put it on the web. Now let's take the web app and do this, and now let's take that. Rinse, repeat. Now, I will admit almost every app I've worked on ultimately becomes spreadsheets and email, because that's what everybody thinks in, you know, for better or worse. So when Goff came around, they said, hey, you know, we're going to document these things for you. And again, I'm sure many of you are familiar with at least some of these, singleton, proxy, facade, visitor, et cetera, et cetera. I was on one project very early in my career where someone said after our first kind of increment, well, we got 11 of the patterns into this release. We're hoping to get the rest into the next version. I'm confident they were joking, I think. But we've certainly seen this applied in other ways as well. This is something that we've rinsed, repeat. That's another thing we're pretty good at in our industry. Let's take that idea and let's apply it somewhere else. Shift left is a perfect example of that. I mean, I wrote a book on presenting where we took this concept of patterns and applied it to presenting. Imagine that. They're really powerful. They encourage us to reuse things. They give us this ability to leverage someone else's learnings. That's really important. This is something I've tried to impress upon my son. My son's just became 18. I'm the proud owner of, I guess, an adult. I don't know. Although one of our friends said, no, when they're 18, they're just man babies. They're not really full adults quite yet. I'm like, okay, yeah, that explains a lot. And I've tried to explain to him multiple times, like, you can learn from my mistakes. Don't make the same mistake I made. And he did say to me one day, he's like, Dad, sometimes I just need to make my own mistakes. I'm like, true, but I'm trying to help you avoid the really big ones as much as possible. We're trying to do the same thing. We're trying to save time. We're trying to take these coarser building blocks so we don't always have to start from zero, so that you can focus on those things that are actually unique and interesting in your world and your domain. Another huge value here is it gives us this placeholder, this handle, so that I can communicate a tremendous amount of information very succinctly. It's this nice little shortcut, an alias, which is awesome. The right way to phrase this is it's a higher bandwidth conversation. So if we're having a conversation, I can say facade, and instead of me having to spend 10 or 15 minutes explaining, I say facade, and we're on the same page, assuming you know what I mean by facade, and assuming we actually are in the same place on what that meaning is. It's always possible that I think of it one way and you think of it slightly differently, and that may cause an issue for us. But it turns out there's more patterns in software than just this. We, as human beings, have patterns too. And you may think of these more in terms of cognitive biases, if you will. And you can't eliminate them, you can't avoid them. I learned that pretty early in my career. I was having a conversation with my boss and I made some comment about politics, and he said, Nate, you can't avoid politics. You got 3 people in a room, you got politics. You got to learn how to deal with it. As much as a lot of us get into this space because we don't want that messy human stuff, it's like, well, you can't avoid it. None of us works on a project that's just us. There's always other people. And so my hope here is just to give you some awareness on these things so that when you encounter them, okay, yeah, here's what's going on. Now let me try to work through it. Now here's how I can deal with it. A big one I see all the time is not invented here, otherwise known as NIH, otherwise known as not my idea. I've seen an awful lot of people decide, well, I'm going to reinvent that because special snowflake, whatever it happens to be. Extremely, extremely common. A lot of people have a belief, generally erroneous, that I can build something better than what's off the shelf because we're this amazing snowflake and we do it so uniquely. This is secret sauce, so obviously we need to do it our own way. I hear that a lot, like this is what is our differentiator in the market, et cetera. And to be fair, sometimes that actually is true. This actually is what differentiates you from your competitors. And you absolutely, in my opinion, should own that. But is it really a differentiator? And sometimes it's important for us to be able to take a step back and ask some of these impertinent questions. A lot of organizations have a very strong bias from any idea that comes from outside the organization. A lot of times this boils down to politics. This boils down to, this is my turf, how dare you mess with my fiefdom. There's absolutely some jealousy that's part of this as well. I want to be the one that has this big budget to do these things. This is part of the deal. My friend Neil has this interesting quote that I've used multiple times, which is, meta work is more interesting than work. To be clear, a lot of what we do is fairly repetitious, right? So I got to add a field to the UI, and then I got to map that into something in the data store, and I got to tie it together. And it's like, oh man, that's the 19 trillionth time I've done that. But what would really be a good use of my intellectual horsepower is to build a framework instead of just adding. I'm going to build a framework to add fields, and it's like, oh. I've even seen people go so far as to say, well, I mean, why would I want to use Spring when I could just build my own dependency injection framework? It's like, really, stop and think that through when you consider how many people years of time and effort have gone into creating something as robust as Spring. Not to mention the fact that, well, wait, do you have anybody that knows your hand-rolled framework? What happens when you try to hire for that? It gets really, really hard. It's more fun, sure, I get that. Like that's an interesting problem to solve. You know, frameworks are cool. I have seen in a lot of cases, this is an example of just some insecurity. You know, and I've experienced this directly. This is a long time ago, but I'd introduced Groovy into an organization, and I actually had a very good reason to do it. This wasn't me practicing resume-driven design. This was, no, we have this problem. Groovy actually can solve it, and we don't have another way to solve it. And so it was a win for us. Now, bear in mind, this was just an internal tool. This was never going to ship with the project. This was just something to help us do our builds. And the person that kind of ran our builds blocked me, and he said, absolutely not. We don't resort to wacky workarounds here. I thought, well, that's very interesting because you've actually built a framework on top of several existing frameworks. So it seems like a lot of what you have here are wacky workarounds. But yes, me introducing Groovy is crazy. Now, interestingly enough, 6 months later, this same person discovered Groovy and then began to use it extensively. Now, I don't know him that well. You know, maybe he just didn't like me. Maybe it's because I was the new guy. Maybe he just didn't want to share the credit. I have no idea. I've certainly seen instances where people are like, well, I can't admit someone else on the team has a good idea. That won't work because then I won't be the one who gets the bonus, the raise, promotion, whatever. I have run into some people who actually do have this emotional need to be the one in the spotlight. I've seen that. I've seen people who, you know, sometimes I call them the arsonist firefighter. You know, they're the person that loves to run into the burning code base, and they like that feeling when, you know, the manager's like, oh, thank God you're on it, you know. But then the managers also don't realize, you know, they're the ones that keep lighting fires in the code base, right? I mean, there's a pattern emerging here if you would take a step back. It's important to understand that this comes from like a scarcity mindset, in my opinion. This isn't a zero-sum game. The goal is to make better software, to improve some business function, to deliver business value. We shouldn't be so caught up in, well, if I get credit, you get credit. I mean, it's like, that shouldn't matter. I mean, I know that's it still does because we do need raises and promotions. I would hope most of us learned how to share in kindergarten, although very clear to me some people were absent that day. Also absent the day they learned the golden rule. It's another one that seems to be, you know, unevenly distributed. A very closely related pattern here is the IKEA effect. So that there is a literal cognitive bias that says we place a higher value on an item that we created. So literally, there was a study that said, okay, how much would we have to pay to get this beautiful IKEA product back from you? We're going to buy it back from you. If you assembled it yourself versus having the store assemble it, you needed 63% more to have me take it off your hands because you assembled it. Some of your blood, sweat, and tears are now in this product. Not to mention a couple of screws left over that you're like, I hope those were extra. I don't know. But this is a very real thing. There's no two ways about it. There's also the mere exposure effect. Now, you can make an argument that familiarity may breed contempt, but we absolutely prefer things we're familiar with. And I'm convinced this is a huge part of the dogmatism that some of us have around programming languages. We can get very particular about, oh, how dare you say anything about my programming language? You know, and I do kind of have this theory that a lot of us, like, time began with whatever that first language happened to be. And it's like, well, there might be other ways of doing this, or, you know, it's possible that feature has existed in other languages for years. You know, I do like to give my good friend of mine who does a lot of work in C#, and so I like to give her a lot of grief and say, you do realize you capitalize things weirdly, right? And then she looks at me and rolls her eyes and, you know, whatever. A lot of this stuff is actually very arbitrary. It really is. Although I will admit, my son is doing AP Comp Sci this year, and I've been trying to help him from time to time. Well, he doesn't always like help, and that's the other beauty of having a teenage boy in the house. But I was helping him debug something the other day, and I'm like, you gotta put a space there, and you gotta put a space there. And I was trying to help him, like, just format it, because I'm like, it's just wrong, you know. And I told him, I said, I know it doesn't matter, but it matters, you know. And it's like, oof. I've been in a lot of organizations, and the one phrase that I hear, in not always phrased exactly this way, but it comes up constantly, is, that's how we've always done it. And my response, and I usually try to be very tactful about this, is, does it have to be that way? Now, it is possible that you stumbled upon the ideal, perfect way of doing it, and this is as optimized as it gets. It's also possible we just stumbled upon it and we've just been doing it that way ever since, because that's how we've always done it. It is in our best interest to take a step back and say, well, does it have to be this way? My wife's a business analyst, and she's awesome at poking holes in this. And you know, I'll kind of go down some path, and she's like, hang on, stop. What's your actual requirement? You know, stop solutioning me. What's your actual requirement? She does a really good job of trying to break me out of that sort of cycle of, but I got to do it this way. It's like, do you? There might be another approach. So why is this an issue? I was actually just on a call before this talking about one of our clients, and the phrase that I threw out there is, they need to realize the status quo isn't free. The way you're doing it today has a cost. That might be higher than necessary. It's entirely possible that the current approach is actually costing us a lot more than if we tried to do it the right way. And sometimes that's an opportunity cost. Sometimes that we can't solve this problem because we're focusing so much energy on this other problem, or, well, yeah, I know we're stuck on this older version, and that means we can't do this because that language feature isn't there, or that framework feature isn't there. Whenever I find myself in the hand-rolled framework, I always ask, well, how many people do you have supporting that? What else could they do? What higher value things could they do? Do you have a lot of customers who are really proud of the framework you wrote? Probably not. I'll be honest with you, if your customers know that level of detail about your projects, they know what frameworks you're using, what data store you're using, you know, like, hey, what version of Kubernetes are we on? Run. That is bad. The worst customers I've ever experienced are the ones who were either former IT or think they're still IT people, and it's like, no, that's my lane. Any amount of effort and time that goes into one of those things is effort and time I can't spend helping my customer solve a problem that matters to them. And ask yourself, where do you think your customers want you investing your time? We need to be above the value line. We need to be doing as little undifferentiated heavy lifting as possible. This is my old boss, Andrew Clay Schaefer, and I love this slide. You know, good job configuring servers this year, said no CEO ever. He's absolutely right. You know, I absolutely understand why we need to modernize, why we need to get off of an old version of Java or your data store or your framework, et cetera. But we need to be able to communicate that to non-technical people in a way they understand it. You know, we spent a lot of time a couple years ago talking to customers about, hey, here's how you prep to get onto the next version of Spring, and amazing how many people are like, well, we're still running on Java 8, and we even had one person who's like, well, we're still on Java 6, and I'm like, really? Oh, okay. The analogy I came up, well, I actually used two. One, your car, if it's an internal combustion engine, needs to get its oil changed periodically. Now, you don't have to change the oil the second your odometer ticks over. You've got some runway. But if you kick the can down the street too far, you turn what was, you know, $50 in an hour into thousands of dollars in days by going just a little too far. The other analogy I used is, you would never get on an airplane if the airline proudly told you, we haven't done any maintenance on the plane in the last 3 years because it's been working. We didn't want to touch anything in case we broke something. And yet we do that all the time. Like, oh no, don't upgrade it because it's working. And like, but at what cost? Customers want features and functionality. We are delivering business value. That's what we're striving for here. And part of our challenge is, how do we communicate that to people? To most of the universe, Spring is not, in fact, a framework. It is a season. We are in it now, allegedly. Although on Monday, I got a text from my wife, and she said, you're not allowed to travel in March anymore. And I said, why not? She said, we're supposed to get another 7-8 inches of snow on Wednesday. I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. I was at DevNexus a couple weeks ago, and of course it snowed while I was gone, and so she was a little upset with me that she had to handle it all by, well, the teenage son was there. I mean, so she didn't have to do everything by herself, but luckily it turns out that's now gonna go south and miss us, so I guess I'm off the hook, at least for now. But I've seen a lot of instances where we overlook simpler solutions, things that could absolutely save us a whole bunch of time if we just did it. I mentioned this earlier, but hiring is a really important part of this equation. If you've got a hand-rolled thing, where do you hire for that? There's a lot of developers that know Spring. There's a lot of developers that know Java. Nobody knows your hand-rolled thing, not outside your company. Now, I've seen some organizations forgive this by saying, well, we've already invested so much money in this. That's the sunk cost fallacy. See that a lot. It's like, well, once we spent $2 million, we got to keep spending. Actually, no, you don't. You can stop digging, put the shovel down. But a lot of organizations use past spending to justify even more continued spending because, again, we've already spent so much. You don't actually have to do that. Even though people have this aversion that say, oh, no, I can't do that. I have to throw it all away. I mean, I get it. Like human beings, we do this. It's like if you're trying to watch what you eat and it's like, oh, man, I had pizza for lunch. I guess I should just have a, cake for dinner because, the whole day is already shot. It's like, it doesn't have to be that way, right? I mean, the past is the past, right? So sunk cost is gone. We can't get past that. Can't change that. Sorry. I guess step 2, invent a time machine. Good luck with that. So any decision we make now isn't going to change that equation. The more important thing is to take a step back and let's ask honestly, well, should we continue going down that path? If we were to start today, which is where we're at, like what would we do now? Right? Again, put the shovel down. I mean, that should be pretty obvious. I mean, although I guess we learned this the hard way. You get in an argument and you just kind of keep having that argument and eventually you realize, I guess I really should just stop digging this hole. This is not getting us anywhere. Again, put the damn shovel down. Also really important to ask why. This is where having an outside perspective can be very helpful. This is one of the things that I love about my job is I get to come in without the baggage, without the that's how we've always done it, and I can ask impertinent questions like, why do you do it that way? Is that the best way to do it? Is there another way to do it? What do you think about this? We all get myopic. There's no two ways about it. We get very set in our ways. I was at an organization and I was looking at one of our HTML pages and we kept closing tags on the following line. And I'm just like, God, this looks so weird. And I asked one of my teammates, I'm like, Jeff, why do we do this? And he said, oh, well, there used to be a language encoding problem on an old version of Tomcat. If you closed the tag on the same line, you couldn't change the language encoding later. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense, I guess. Well, Tomcat fixed that, right? Like, oh, yeah, it's been fixed for years. I'm like, all right, that makes sense. Well, do we still support that old version of Tomcat? Oh, God, no. I'm like, all right, well, why am I seeing this in the code? It's like, it's probably just an old page. Like, Jeff, somebody added it yesterday. He's like, oh, yeah, they shouldn't have done that. But what some developer undoubtedly did was, well, I mean, I saw this in the code and I just copied and pasted because there must be a good reason. I just don't know what it is. And I didn't bother to ask. I don't understand why that is. It's okay to ask. What's the worst thing that happens? Somebody explains it to you. Or they go, I don't know either. Like, let's dig into this. That fresh perspective is powerful. This is one of the best things about having a new hire. They will absolutely find something in your code that the rest of you, oh, you're right. I never even thought about that because I'm just so used to seeing it. You just kind of get blind to it. That's one of the beauties of having people that are fresh to the industry as well. They don't have that baggage. Like, they will spot things that you don't see. Some of you cannot read the number here. Some of you can, most of you can. But this is what I mean. There's things that you just won't see. Do not be afraid to challenge the status quo. Do not dismiss ideas just out of hand. I've seen that happen a lot. Oh, that'll never work here. Why? Why not? Because you tried a couple years ago and it didn't work, or you just don't like that approach, or like, why? Let's have a conversation about this. We need to encourage junior developers to ask those kinds of questions, to push back, to show us what they got. I had an example very early in my career. I call it the capitalization thing. So my tech lead gave me this very straightforward assignment, go in and capitalize this. And she said, here's how you do it. We're going to go in and capitalize the billing address. So this is the routine I need you to modify. This is the function I want you to call. And so I look at the capitalize function and I'm like, whoa, this thing's a mess. I do not understand what's going on here. In my head, I'm thinking this should have what, like 2 parameters, like the thing to capitalize, and maybe that's it. I don't know. I mean, what are all these other things? And it had a lot of arguments. I mean, I think it was close to a dozen. And I'm just trying to think, like, why do you have a dozen arguments to the function to capitalize something? This just seems weird. And so I had a decision to make. Like, well, I can spend the next number of hours trying to decipher this homegrown thing, and it probably would be closer to days. But I thought, wait a minute, this seems like the kind of thing the language we're using should solve for us. Now, I was not an expert in that programming language by any stretch of the imagination. But I'm like, you know what, let me poke around a little bit here. And so I searched, and imagine that. The language had a feature to capitalize things. No one could have predicted this. So following week, we're in our team meeting, going around the room, and get to me. I describe what I did, the capitalization assignment. Someone says, oh, did you use the blah, blah, blah method? I'm like, nope. Like, cue record scratch moment. Every head in that room turned and looked at me. I was like, wait, what? What'd the new guy do? I was by far the least experienced developer in that room. I was the only one that knew the language had that feature baked in. Now, I don't know when it was added. Maybe it was just within the last 6 months, the last year. I have no clue. But I guarantee you those developers didn't look because, well, that's how we've always done it. We just always use Bob's capitalization function. I took 2 lessons away from that. One, lazy developer ethos. If you think there should be an easier way, there probably is. Stop. Take 5 minutes, 10 minutes to just verify there actually isn't an easier way before you try to do it the hard way. 2, never, ever underestimate the value of fresh eyes. Incredibly powerful when you get someone else to look at your code base. All of us have had that experience where you're staring at something, you're like, oh, it's not working, what's going on? I don't understand what the problem is. And you're just grind. And then you explain it to someone, and almost instantly you see the problem. This has happened to me, I can just think of 2 examples right off the top of my head. I was doing this little scripting thing, and I could get this one to work, but not that one to work, and I was really frustrated, and I pinged my buddy Jonathan, and he's like, well, let's hop on a Zoom call. And literally, as I copied and pasted the code over to him, I'm like, oh, I did not equals instead of equals. Oh, and I felt like such an idiot. And of course, my buddy Jonathan's like, you're welcome. Sometimes the answer is to explain it to the rubber ducky on your desk. I actually have a Yoda bust on my desk. That's who I explain things to. So that can help. Just talking through it, you go, oh, I see what I did wrong here. I have this problem a lot, the solutioning problem. The XY problem, otherwise known as the jump to conclusion, Matt. We have a tendency to immediately go to solutions when someone starts coming to us with a problem. Like, okay, here's what we're going to do to solve that. A lot of times we do that before we even understand what the problem actually is. We're immediately going to implementation detail. This is, I think, one of the most important quotes around from Rich Hickey. Most of the big problems we have in software are problems of misconception. We don't have a good idea of what we're doing before we do it, and it's go, 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 go. Absolutely right. I'm going to go out on a limb and say this has happened to everyone in this room. You don't have the requirements yet, but you're told to start building software because the developers are ready, and we can't have the developers sitting on their hands. This happens to my wife all the time. Again, she's a BA, and so she's like, we don't even know what the customer wants yet. Well, the team's ready, so they're going to start cutting code. Why? And best case scenario, we throw that code away. Best case scenario. Worst case scenario, we don't. And it just comes along like a vestigial tail for the rest of the project. These are absolutely endemic to software. A friend of mine was telling me he was on a project where their product owner kept using client and customer. And the team assumed, that's usually a risky thing right there, they were interchangeable, they were synonyms. Until 4 or 5 iterations in, the product owner says, well, that'll work for a client, but not a customer. And everyone went, oh, wait, what? Turns out they are distinct, very similar concepts. Now, here's the reality. There is no amount of test coverage. There is no language feature. There is no type system that is going to protect you from problems of misconceptions. That's just the reality of it. Rather than us having to find a workaround later, it'd be really nice if we could just avoid the problem entirely in the first place. Now, sometimes what this boils down to is we're just fixated on the wrong details. And yeah, we make a lot of assumptions. Classic one is, hey, I need to get the last 3 characters of a file name. Okay, why do you need the last 3 characters of a file name? Well, because your extensions are always 3 characters. Like, well, not anymore. And the way it used to be. Again, ask why. Why do you need that thing? What is the problem you are trying to solve? Now, sometimes what this means is we actually have to slow down a little bit. And I know that that's challenging because we're always being told we got to go faster, we got to get more features, the velocity's got to go up, customers need this, and there's this rush. One of the phrases that I've tried to instill in my son is take the time it takes so it takes less time. Every one of us has been like in a hurry and you rush out of the house and you're like, oh, I forgot XYZ, and you got to turn around and go back. My son's a soccer player. Last year, there's this giant tournament that takes place where I live in the Twin Cities. It's like, I think, the largest youth soccer tournament in this hemisphere or something crazy like that. And it's an entire week where there are, I don't know how many games. It's a ton, and all age groups and teams from all over the world. It's absolutely crazy. And so I've tried to get into my son's head, like, hey, you got to double check everything before we leave. Do you have your gloves? Do you have your cleats? Do you have an extra pair of cleats? Do you have an extra pair of gloves? Do you have extra kit in case your colors are too close to all these things? Yeah, Dad. Yeah, Dad. That week, every single day, he forgot something. And it's like, this is why I say this. And we were able to solve the problem because we left enough slack, but it's like, Everett, this is why I tell you, take the time it takes so it takes less time. Don't pack your bag as we're leaving the house. Do it the night before. Please, I beg you. This is probably the most common phrase my wife throws at me, stop solutioning me. Again, this is what happens when you marry a BA. What are your actual requirements? There's a lot of value in just taking a step back and asking, all right, is there another solution here? Is there a simpler approach? If we're not careful, we end up in yak shave land. Every one of us has shaved a yak at some point. It's just endemic. How does this work? Well, let's see. In order to solve this problem, I need to use this library. But to get this library, I need to update my package manager. Well, to update my package manager, I need to update to a new version of Java. Oh, well, or Python. Oh, and update to a new version of this, I need to update my operating system. And the next thing you know, you're shaving a yak and you have no idea why. And you're just covered in yak hair and the yak's not happy about it. Put down the clippers. And then you're like, wait, what was I trying to do again? Sometimes this requires us to break that loop and take a step back. Again, explain it to a coworker. That goes a long, long way. It is amazing how often that's going to expose, oh, you made an assumption here. It actually doesn't work that way. It works this way. Or, you could do it this other way. I've actually run into that problem. Here's another way to solve it. I've seen a lot of instances where I will break out of that loop. Here's another one. This is one I made. This is a mistake I made. A little bit of Java code for you to stare at. So I'm testing this, and I'm trying to figure out why is my role not working the way I expect it to. If you're an admin or a scorer or a manager, you should be able to do this, and yet it's not working the way I thought it was going to work. Some of you have already spotted my mistake. Some of you are like, what? This was another one of those examples where I literally copied and pasted into Slack, and as soon as I did, I saw what I did wrong, and this was actually Dan Vega was the one helping me on that. And when I was staring at this late at night trying to figure out what was going on, I was absolutely lost. Then I shared it to Dan and immediately saw what I did wrong. Of course, my code should have looked like this. Oops, those are in fact 3 distinct strings, not one big string that had commas in the middle of it. And I will admit, I felt like an idiot. Like, that's really common. Like, I thought I was a pretty good programmer. Oops. Again, explaining it to another human being is incredibly powerful. Love the rubber ducky. Again, I like Yoda heads, but you do you. It is very powerful. Sometimes you just need to unlock part of your brain and distract it. And doodling can work here if you're more artistically oriented. Daydreaming actually can help just kind of let your brain wander a little bit. Take a walk. It's probably good for all of us. Maybe do some stretches. Go get a cup of coffee. I mean, that's an easy one, right? Like, nobody's going to argue against that one, I hope. Check your assumptions. Are you sure? Is this really what's going on? Does it have to work that way? Now, if you're still absolutely stuck, just put it away. Take a nap. Go to bed. It's amazing what happens when you put a problem down and you let your brain work on it. We have this sort of R mode versus L mode in our brains. There's the forest versus the trees, right? So the R mode is that search and retrieve. It ends up being nonverbal, and we don't directly control it. This is the one that's running in the background. This is the one where you're sitting there going, wait, I know I've seen that person. What show were we just watching that had that person in it? And then like 20 minutes later, boom, there it is. Oh yeah, that person. Although my wife is like a walking IMDb. She got that from her parents. Like her parents are crazy. They can watch any movie, any show, and they can tell you like who any of the actors are, what other movies they've been in, and it's scary. And I keep thinking, no, you're not right. And I go to IMDb, I'm like, yeah, you're right. All right, I've learned I don't even challenge her anymore. But this is what happens, right? It's like this answer just appears later, randomly, uncontrollably. So how do we unlock that? We got to distract the L mode. You prime the pump, you think about the problem, you get it kind of loaded in your brain, and then do something that distracts the L mode. That's, like hop in the shower, mow the lawn, wash the dishes. That sort of rote activity, the L mode's like, oh yeah, I love doing that. And your R mode's like, oh, finally, you gave me control for a little while here. And so the R mode can go and do its thing. What is the actual problem here? What is the actual use case? Is there a simpler way? There probably is. The older I get, the more convinced I am that dogmatism in just about anything is bad. I mean, unless we're talking about your favorite sports team or your favorite color or your favorite food, something like that, by all means, be dogmatic. But when it comes to our world, we need to be ruthlessly pragmatic about things. Ruthlessly pragmatic. Dogmatism kills. Having this formulaic approach, must be done this way, is rarely a good idea. As an example, a lot of times we come into a project, it's like, oh, there's no tests. Obviously, the very first thing we must do is write tests. This happened to a friend of mine. He was brought into a project and they had no unit tests. And so he's like, okay, obviously this must be where we start. And then he said, wait, hang on a sec here. How long has everybody been here? It turns out the person with like the least amount of experience on the team had been there a decade. It's like, oh, okay, so you're all intimately familiar with the code base. So maybe that's not our number one problem here. You have to adapt and adjust. We also have to deal with imposter syndrome. Now, I will tell you that every single person suffers from imposter syndrome. Well, maybe not every single person. Actually, the people who don't have some imposter syndrome are the dangerous ones. Really and truly, I mean that. This happens to all of us. At least it should. I love this. I had such a bad day at work, I thought maybe after 10 years of being a software engineer, I'm just not cut out for this. Really? Probably not. Again, this is a healthy thing. Years ago, we were at an event and people were kind of being a little arrogant in the hallways and basically like, oh, I don't write bad code. And so we had an expert panel and every single one of us introduced ourselves by saying, hi, my name is, and I write crappy code. We've all written crappy code. Have you ever been staring at some code and you wondered yourself, like, what idiot wrote this? And then you realize it was you? You're like, oh, wait, I wrote this a couple years ago or a couple months ago. That's actually a good thing, in my opinion. If you look at something you wrote like 3, 4, 5 years ago and you're not at least a little bit disappointed in it, ooh, that's kind of scary. Yeah, because that means you've learned things. If you're like, oh, wow, I wouldn't do it that way today. That's been one of the weird things about trying to help my son work through some of these things in AP Comp Sci, because he's trying to do it in kind of the way they're teaching it. I'm like, well, why wouldn't you just use an iterator there? He's like, Dad, I don't know what that is. And I'm like, I haven't taught you iterator? And it's like, it's the same thing. It's just like, but I only know how to use a for loop. I'm like, okay, all right, we'll do it that way if that makes everything happy. Again, we should be improving. That's the goal here. No two ways about it. I've done this. You've done this. You're editing something and it's like, why isn't it taking my change? What's going on? You're like, oh, I'm editing the wrong one. I'm editing the wrong file. Oh. There are people who, at least outwardly, will claim they know everything. They do not. Those people are incredibly dangerous on your project, in my opinion. Our space has gotten so specialized over the years. Think about what doctor used to mean back in the day. Doctor was a very broad term. This was a person who amputated your leg, they pulled a tooth, they gave you a shave. I think we would have called them full stack doctors. That's not the world we live in today. If you're an orthopedic surgeon, you focus on specific joints. The doctor that did my hip, that's all he does, hips and knees, period, full stop. Doesn't do shoulders, doesn't do elbows, hips, knees, period. That's it. you can actually specialize in being a general practitioner. And then you look at our space. It has exploded during our career. It used to be, hey, if you're really serious about this, you should build your own hardware. Anybody build a machine lately? Probably not. I mean, that's cool. It's not, it's fun, can be fun. But look at where most of our stuff runs today. It lives in the cloud. We're short-term leasing somebody else's compute. Here's the reality of our space. You cannot possibly know all of it. You can't. I mean, just look at an event like this. How many sessions are you unable to go to? You can't. It'd be nice if we could like split ourselves. Like that'd be nice. Or that little time turner thing from Harry Potter. That'd be cool. Heat death of the universe is going to happen first, friends. Almost everything that gets produced, you're going to miss it. In the amount of time we've been chatting, there's probably been enough video uploaded to YouTube and other social media sites. You could spend like the rest of the week watching and would not get through, all of it by far. It's important to understand that in our space, you're going to have to focus, and that means you're not going to get to surf every wave. Sorry about that. It is okay for us to say, I don't know. Although I think as an architect, what I try to say is, let me find out for you. Let me figure out what the solution is. That's part of our job as, I would say, senior engineers is, I'm not sure what the solution is yet, but we'll get to the bottom of it. This is important for us to express to less experienced folks as well, that where they're coming from is perfectly okay. You cannot know. This surface area has gotten so broad, there's no way you're going to know all of it. I love this tweet, very poignant given what's been going on in Shar's life, but it's okay to admit you don't know something. It's not okay to shame someone for something they don't know. As his dad says, you know less than you know. There's someone in this room that knows more about something than I do. I know more about something in this room than some of you do. I mean, that's totally natural. That's part of what I love about this. I love having those conversations. Like, tell me more about what you're passionate about. That's cool. Now, I'm fairly certain this was Photoshop, but we're going to run with it. Putting like topics together, unexplained phenomena, software programming. How frustrating is it when it's like the solution is a reboot and you're like, why? And on the one hand, you're like, well, it works, so I kind of don't care. But on the other hand, you're like, but I really want to know why. Like, how do I prevent that from happening in the future? It's okay to admit I don't know what's going on here. I'm not sure what's happening. Maybe we can figure it out. Maybe we can't. The hard part here is this takes humility and this takes confidence. The best engineers I know are curious. And when they encounter something they don't quite understand, they're like, tell me more about that. Explain that to me. The engineers that are like, oh, I'm going to put up a force field and pretend, oh, yeah, no, I know everything about that. And it's like those are the ones that have a little bit of that insecurity. And we can coach them through that. We can help them understand, hey, I've been there, done that. I don't know everything about that. There is no possibility to know everything in our space. There's nothing wrong with specializing. I'm not a big fan of the term full stack developer. Just think about what this implies. You would have to know multiple front-end technologies, multiple data stores, multiple programming languages, all the cloud providers, how to get code to production, how to keep it running in production, observability, monitoring, security, testing, architecture, project management. Where's that unicorn? Seriously, how could you possibly know all those things? Whether or not Gladwell was right about, or I guess you could ask ChatGPT, 10,000 hours or not, like there's just too much there. I would argue what we're really looking for is simpler than that. It's someone who's willing to work on what we need to do today, as opposed to in the past where it's like, oh no, I'm a UI developer. I don't do that. Or oh, I'm a back-end developer. I don't mess with the UI. We need specialized generalists. That's really what we're striving for here. And this is sometimes referred to as T-shaped. A little bit about a lot of things. Know there are multiple frameworks, multiple languages, but you've gone deep in a couple of them. That's really what we're striving for here, in my opinion. This is the other really interesting challenge for us. We have this tendency to kind of fall in love with a tool and decide, this is the answer to every problem. But is it? When should I put that tool down? The analogy I'll leave you with is, if you were working construction one summer or something, and day one, it's like, hey, we're tearing down a wall. And they hand you a sledgehammer, and you tear down that wall, and you're like, wow, sledgehammers are amazing. There used to be a wall here, and now it's gone, and I don't have any stress. So the next day, hey, we're going to put a wall up. And you're like, great, I've got my sledgehammer. Nope, put that one down. Wrong tool. let me introduce you to a framing hammer. We're going to use that to build the wall. And then, of course, when we're going to put that nice maple trim up, we're going to put the framing hammer down. We're going to grab this thing called a finishing hammer. That's the challenge for us. Because again, we tend to fall in love with that tool and decide that's the answer to every problem. It's like, but is it? Might there be another approach? Well, friends, thank you so much for hanging out with me. I really appreciate it. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Enjoy lunch. Cheers.